It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by CartKing.com. You go to cart-king.com, 877-986-7771. Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Perhaps your current business wants to add multiple point-of-sale locations across the country quickly. Maybe the facility you manage could kickstart revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services. Well, CartKing.com can be the answer to your needs. CartKing.com is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile retail, coffee, food carts, and kiosks that money can buy for 20 years. CartKing.com has been working with clients and corporations across America to provide indoor and outdoor carts and kiosks for any application. So you go to cart-king.com, give them a call, 877-986-7771. Okay. We got a really good guest today. We heard about him through Patrick Knowlton. We just did a show with Patrick Knowlton about his experience with Brett Kavanaugh during the whole Vince Foster investigation. He's written a book called The Martyrdom of Thomas Merton, an investigation. He's co-authored with David Martin, I think, who has also been on the show as well. You can find his website at the Martyrdom of ThomasMerton.com. Also, too, he's part of this other website that we were plugging with Patrick Knowlton, FBI-coverup.com. He's a journalist, and he's also a magician, too, so maybe we can get him to do some tricks for us. Maybe they'll cut me in half during the interview here. Mr. Hurley, are you there?
I'm here. This is Hugh Turley, and I'm happy to be on your program.
Thank you so much. Mr. Turley, tell us about yourself. Who is you, Turley?
Well, I am a professional magician. I made a living as a magician here in the Washington area. People often ask me, what do I do for a living? I say, I'm in the deception business. And they say, oh, you work for the D.C. government. I say, no, I'm a magician. I'm different than the politicians downtown because I tell you that I'm going to fool you before I do it. But I've been in the deception business since I was in college, philosophy in college, so I pursued that major because I was interested in the truth, and I've always been interested in the truth of things. But at the same time, I've gotten into deception as a hobby, and then it became a profession. But my magic skills have actually helped me find the truth, because to get to the truth, oftentimes you have to get past what's false and how people have fooled us into believing things that are false. So it's that those two things kind of go well together, deception and seeking the truth.
How about hypnotism? A lot of magicians are hypnotists as well.
No, I haven't gotten into that, but that's that one. The hypnotism requires that you almost you go a little too close to deception, because you have to pretend that you're really doing it. And I do comedy, so I let people know that I'm up to mischief.
Okay, excellent. So now you've written this book, The Martyrdom of Thomas Merton, an investigation. Tell us, who was Thomas Merton?
Thomas Merton was a writer, and he was a Trappist monk. He was a very famous writer in the 20th century. He published about 70 books, I guess, during and after his lifetime, and then probably as many books have been written about him. And he was a convert to the Catholic faith and then became a monk. He was very serious about his Catholic faith. And he was a contemplative person and a very interesting man. And he was, like myself, he was a man who loved the truth. And I think I remember when I read his biography, it was a very famous book called The Seven-Story Mountain. And this book was published in 1948, right after World War II. And it brought a lot of young men and women into the religious life. People really loved that book. It was a very big selling book. And it talked about his conversion. It's been compared to the Confessions by Augustine. And Augustine was a man who lived in the 5th century, and he was a lawyer in Rome, and then he used to go to the games where they had the gladiators, and he lived a pretty decadent life, and then he converted to Catholicism and became a bishop of Carthage. And Merton's book, The Seven Storey Mountain, was compared to Augustine's biography, and I've read both. They are similar if you read them both. They're very interesting men and interesting stories. And then Merton died suddenly in 1968. It was the same year that Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King died. I was 19 years old that year, a college student, and not paying too much attention to Merton or politics. I think I was maybe like Brett Kavanaugh. I was interested in beer.
Yeah. Right.
That's what I was doing in college, doing a lot of this work. I had not paid too much attention. Where he died in December 10th, which is 50 years ago this year. So this year is the 50th anniversary of his death. And as this year was approaching, my co-author, David Martin, who I met when I was researching the Vince Foster death, and we were working with Patrick Knowlton, his attorney, he had been kind of urging me to look into Merton's death because he knew I was a good investigator, a good researcher, and he wanted me to look into this. He said, you really need to look into Merton's death. Let's see if we can do something and find out what really happened. And at his urging, I started to do my research. And then when it came to writing the book, Martin is probably a much better writer than I am. I'm kind of good at the research end. He wanted me to get it all down on paper, and then he helped me polish it up. And I put him in as my co-author because he really did a major contribution. I don't think I could have done this book without him. It was really a collaborative effort of the two of us. So
he passed on in 1968. Was he an activist as well, just like all the people that died?
He was known as that. Yes, he was known as an anti-war activist, but not like the Berrigan brothers. Daniel Berrigan and his brother, they were more confrontational. And during the Vietnam War, there was a lot of activism against the war, and some people were more adversarial. But Merton, being a contemplative, was kind of behind the scenes. He didn't get a lot written about war. He wrote a book called Peace in the Post-Christian Era, but his community, the Trappist monks, would not let him publish it. The Master Superior General of the Order said that they wouldn't let him publish that book, although it was completed. He had a publisher, and it was all set to go. But he had taken a vow of obedience, so that book was not published. It was eventually published in 2004. It's a fabulous book, Peace in the Post-Christian Era. And you can substitute the word communism with the word terrorism, and the book is totally relevant to today and to nuclear weapons and so on. He was very much opposed to nuclear weapons and thought we were at the brink, which we were in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But he was actually more dangerous as an opponent of the people that were promoting the war than the average person knows, because Merton not only opposed the violence of the Vietnam War and war in general, he had zeroed in on the role of the news media and the press in shaping public opinion. And he knew that most of the news was not true. And what's remarkable about this man is, get this, he's living in a cloistered monastery called the Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky. And he doesn't have a newspaper, and he doesn't have a television. So he isn't really a big consumer of the news, but he wrote a lot of letters. And I think he wrote about 10,000 letters. And he got letters from people. People wrote letters to him. He wrote letters. And people would come to meet him and see him. And he really knew a lot about what was going on in the world. But he knew it better than most people because he didn't watch the news, which is full of a lot of misinformation. He wrote in one of his books, 90% of the news we receive every day is false. And some days he said 100%. That's a pretty remarkable statement. And I'm amazed when I read things by Merton like that, because I wonder, how did he know that? I mean, how did he figure that out? Because I eventually came to my own conclusion that much of the information that we receive in the universities and in the newspapers and in the magazines and the movies and the television, so on, most of it isn't true. But the people are not really aware when they get information, and it's hard to know what's true from what's false. This man had his finger on that, and he was, I think, maybe a week or two after the Kennedy assassination, he kept a journal, and he had already written in his journal that he thought the whole idea of Oswald killing Kennedy was absurd. I mean, he said that, and then Ruby kills Oswald. I mean, he didn't buy that for a minute. And people that lived through that era, we were told by Walter Cronkite that that's the way it was, and people believed it. And a lot of people still do, but they still teach that story in the universities and high schools and grade schools. And it's on the anniversary of the Kennedy assassination of JFK, they still repeat it as if they did the day it happened. But Merton didn't believe it from the beginning, and that's pretty unusual, I think. I can't think of any other people that were so doubting at the time, but he was.
Yeah, but like you said, if you can filter out that white noise, all that white noise out there that's going on, you can kind of focus in and just use your own logic. You just kind of see what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Yeah,
that's what he did. And see, then, not only did he oppose the Vietnam War, he was critical of the news media. Now, he didn't have a big crowd down on the mall like Martin Luther King did. He drew about 250,000 people there to hear him speak. And he didn't have a platform like Bobby Kennedy when he was running for president, but he was behind the scenes writing to influential people. I mean, he wrote letters to Lyndon Johnson. He wrote letters to Apple Kennedy. He wrote letters to all kinds of writers and politicians and leaders around the world. And he was having an impact. So he was a genuine threat to the powers that be, not so much because people will say to me, well, they wouldn't kill him because he was an anti-war protester. They didn't kill other anti-war protesters. Well, that wasn't what I think got him killed. What got him killed was his keen awareness that the news media was the big promoter of war. And they were the ones that set the wheels in motion, that promoted the propaganda. And he was onto that. And that made him a genuine threat.
Yeah, and we know today just how heavily infiltrated the news media is, we have people come on this show and they do the research, and even TV shows like Cupcake Wars, American Idol, and you find out that they have all kind of funding from CIA and the military. Just fascinating. They have their hand in every single little thing we watch on TV, even if it's you think it's harmless.
Yeah, well, they have every layer covered. So even from the simplest shows to, the late night comedians on their late night shows joke about what's in the news because they keep feeding it to everybody and repeating it. Repetition is important when they soak this stuff into people's brains. Right now, Patrick Knowlton's attorney, John Clark, called it saturation. And people get pounded with this information over and over till they believe it. And if you hear one voice of truth speak up, it really has no effect because it's just one little whisper and all this cacophony of things that are coming out that are leading in the wrong direction. But Merton was smart that way, and I think it made him that's what I think got him killed, really.
No, I thought I saw somewhere, too, in this description of the book, The Martyrdom of Thomas Merton, an investigation. It mentioned, too, that he kind of introduced the Western world to the Dalai Lama and all that. What is that? I can't find it now.
Well, I don't say he introduced him to the Dalai Lama, but he was a contemplative monk, and he had an interest in all mankind, really. And he wasn't just opposed to the Vietnam War, he was opposed to just war, and nuclear war in particular. But he went, his final trips, he lived in the monastery, I think about 27 years he was in there. And he never really came out except to go to a doctor's appointment or something. But he got an invitation to attend a conference in Asia, in Thailand. So when he made this trip, he went to Alaska, and then he went on to Asia. And he traveled and met the Dalai Lama. And he was scheduled to go to Japan after he left Thailand. But he traveled in several Asian countries. And he had an interest in Buddhism, and because it was a meditative type of experience, like his contemplative life as a monk, and he was curious about other forms of meditation. I think he recognized that there's truth, some truth at least, in all religions. and there's things you can take from other religions that are the truth about things. So he traveled there and was meeting with various people for that purpose. But now there's been stories, of course, after someone's dead, they really can't defend themselves or speak for themselves. But some of Merton's critics would say, well, he was going to go join the Buddhists. He was going to leave his Catholic faith. He was going to leave the monastery, and he was no good because he was, so they criticize him that way. That's really not legitimate. He was not going to leave his monastery. He was going to go back to the monastery. He just traveled to Asia and met with some Buddhists along the way, but that wasn't where he's going to leave one faith for another religion. That's not the case. Although it's popular myth.
Now, you mentioned before there's a Thomas Merton Institute or a foundation or something like that. Why don't we give them a plug for people who want to learn more? Well, there's an International Thomas Merton Society. Okay.
And that's an international organization, and they have chapters worldwide. And I think there's about 26 of them, maybe just in the United States, and then maybe a couple dozen around the world, New Zealand, Australia, Europe. And these people meet monthly. They have every 2 years they have a convention. Next year they're having their convention in San Diego or Santa Barbara, California. But they are a group that promotes Merton, and they share books about Merton. And there's also books that keep coming out by Merton because he wrote so much. A lot of his papers, they'll gather some things together every once in a while and put out another book by Thomas Merton. So his things are still being published, and there's books about him. And the International Thomas Merton Society is about promoting Thomas Merton and his writings. And they have down there. His monastery was in the Abbey of Gethsemane, and there's a college nearby, Bellarmine University, which is a Catholic college, and they have a library where part of the library is called the Thomas Merton Center, and the Thomas Merton Center has a collection of all of his writings. They even have some artifacts like his clothing and some things that were found a few years ago. So. And they have a big collection of photographs. And so if you're going to do any research on Thomas Merton, we want to get in touch with them. And the director down there of the Merton Center is Dr. Paul Pearson, and he was very helpful to me the whole time. I mean, I would always call him when I was looking for a document or something, and he would guide me and shared things with me because he knew what I was doing this research on Merton's death. I also found these papers from all over the place. I found papers out at Northwestern University. I found papers at the University of Virginia, and also up at Columbia University in New York City. So I did a little traveling, collecting some documents. I even found documents that they didn't have at the Merton Center, and then I gave them to Dr. Pearson. He was thrilled. He's always trying to add to the collection, So when I would find something he didn't have, he was pretty excited. But he would help me find things, so he was a real partner kind of in helping me do my research. Okay, excellent. Let's take a little commercial break. We're with Hugh Turley. He's the co-author of the book, along with David Martin, of The Martyrdom of Thomas Merton, an Investigation. You can find Hugh's work at fbicover-up.com, along with Patrick Knowlton we just had on. And the website for this book is called The Martyrdom of ThomasMerton.com. We'll be right back after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors.
Hey you, podcast listener. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. Take the blue pill. You wake up in your bed and go back to listening to mundane podcasts that won't challenge your religious beliefs and your so-called truths about reality, the universe, and consciousness. Take the red pill. Subscribe to the Event Horizon podcast, hosted by Mark Anthony Peterson, and he will show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Event Horizon takes a walk into the paranormal with a splash of conspiracy. It's the podcast that would be born if David Icke and the X-Files had a baby. Subscribe to the Event Horizon podcast by Mark Anthony Peterson on Spreaker, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Stitcher, or any of your other favorite podcast platforms. Remember, all we are offering is the truth, nothing more.
Are you ready to change your life, but don't know how to start? Is your stress and worries keeping you awake at night? Have you been battling grief, anxiety, or depression all alone? Have you lost touch with your own sense of being or spirituality? Soul Free Therapies offers professional and affordable live video streaming counseling and coaching services from the comfort of your own home. Sessions offered in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Go to our website at www.soul-free.com and book your first session today.
PureSoapFlakes.com, 218-568-2525. Have you ever heard of Castile Soap? Pure Soap Flake Company handcrafts fine soap bars, laundry powder, and concentrated soap flakes using organic vegetable oils from their northern Minnesota facility. Bathe your body and wash your clothes with Pure Soap products that are free of fragrance, GMOs, palm oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, and synthetic additives. Keep it clean, folks. Pure Soap Flake Company products are kind to living creatures and sensitive skin, safe for drains and waterways, and work great in high-efficiency washers and top and front-loading machines. Order today at PureSoapFlakes.com, GreenHome.com, Amazon.com, or give them a call, 218-568-2525, 218-568-2525. Pure Soap Flake Company is a proud member of the Handcrafted Soap and Cosmetic Guild.
Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Maybe the facility you manage could establish new revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services. Cart King International can be the answer to your needs. Cart King is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile coffee, food, and retail carts and kiosks. Cart King has been working with clients and corporations across North America for 20 years, providing innovative designs, custom manufacturing, and timely delivery. Carts and kiosks are fun, and so are the dozens of designs on our website. Please visit us today at www.cart-king.com or just call us at 1-877-986-7771 and get your sales rolling.
Tina Helmuth is writing an ongoing series of fact-fiction books that boldly takes on today's most heinous crimes: the abduction, sexual trafficking, and cannibalization of our children. Suffer the Little Children, The Wrath of the Father, and Unbreakable. Deeply researched and mixed with the supernatural, good versus evil makes these thrillers hard to put down, shining a light on the root cause of these crimes and introducing a spiritual solution. Justice will be served. Available at lulu.com in paperback or ebook.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. We're here today with Hugh Turley. He's an author of the book, The Martyrdom of Thomas Merton. You can find his work also, too, at FBIcover-up.com, where he talks about the murder of, the death of Vince Foster. The official version is it's a death, or a suicide, but we know more than that. Mr. Turley, why don't you give us the official version first of how we lost Thomas Merton, and then we can get into your investigation, what your conclusion was.
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to tell you. I was, whenever I look at something like this, like I did with the Foster case, I remember John Clark, Patrick Stone's attorney, said we got to go back to the beginning. So I was curious about the official documents. He died in Thailand, in a small town outside of Bangkok, and I wanted to know if there was a death certificate, if there was a doctor's coroner's report, or if they had any records of any police investigation. I wrote to the Abbey, to one of them and asked them about these documents, if they had any documents. And he wrote back and told me, this monk wrote back and told me he'd identified the body when it came back, and he told me a number of things, but he didn't tell me anything about any of the questions I asked. He didn't answer any of them. And then later I found out that this Archbishop of Milwaukee, Rembert Weekland, who was involved in this pedophile scandal in Milwaukee and was forced to resign, he wrote a memoir, and I was plugging his book on the radio station. I heard him say that he was present when Merton died. And I thought, wow, this guy was there? Really? And you're involved in a scandal? I mean, tell me more. So I got in touch with Rembrandt Weekland, and he was pretty nice on the phone. And I told him I was interested in Merton's death, and he said he had documents. I said, really? So he mailed me documents from Thailand. He mailed me a doctor's certificate, which was a coroner's report, and the death certificate in the Thai language and in English. Both documents were in Thai and English. They'd been translated by the U.S. Embassy. And these were official documents that he brought back from Thailand in 1968, and he held them all these years. And they were yellowed paper, but after I looked at them, I said, would you like them back? He said, no, you can keep them. I don't need them anymore. Well, then I contacted the National Archives, where I'd done research before, because Merton died overseas. I thought the State Department might have some records, and they did. They had the doctor's certificate, the death certificate, Thai language, English language, but they were different from Weekland's copies. They weren't exactly the same. And there was also a report that was issued by the U.S. Embassy, which was the only U.S. government document on his death. It was titled "The Report of the Death of an American Citizen." And interestingly, all of these documents say that he died of cardiac arrest. It was a heart attack. And I also, in my research, found a police report, which is a very interesting document because it has no one's signature on it. It has no date. It has no title. It's just called the police report. And it came with a cover letter to the monastery, but they don't have a copy anymore. It eventually moved around to I found a copy at the Merton Center, one at Northwestern University. But all of these documents, including the police report, said he died of cardiac failure. And the police report went so far as to say that after he had the heart attack, he fell into a fan. After he died, he was dead. The dead priest fell into the fan. And this is the official story. And the official documents, well, some of them say he had an autopsy. The death certificate said he had an autopsy. And the doctor's coroner's report said the body was taken to the hospital for the autopsy. But one of the doctor's reports, the one from the archives, has a note at the bottom by the counselor at the U.S. Embassy that says, well, it actually wasn't taken for an autopsy at the hospital. So that's not true. What's written on this document, in other words, is not true. So you get the official Thai document saying he had an autopsy. You got an embassy official saying, no, he didn't have an autopsy. In fact, he really did not have an autopsy because the body was never removed from the Red Cross Center there where he died in Bangkok. He was at a conference of Christian monks, mostly Benedictines. And so the official story is heart attack. And some of the official documents say autopsy, but of course that was not actually done. Now, that's sort of what this was not what was reported in the American papers at the time. This was what was reported in the Thai papers. Thai newspapers carried the story that Merton died of a heart attack. But right off the bat, in the United States and the rest of the English-speaking world, and in Europe, I guess you could say that they reported that Thomas Merton died of an accident. They called it an accidental electrocution with a fan. And that became the story. It originated in the press. And if you look at the original stories that were reported in the American newspapers, they were based on an anonymous Catholic source. So you've got that's the story that took root in this country, is that he died of an accident, and it's from an anonymous source. And that's been repeated by scholars from Notre Dame, every Catholic college professor that teaches this stuff, and they all say, and the books have been written, and there've been a lot of books written, and whenever they mention Merton's death, he died of accidental electrocution. But most people don't get electrocuted by a household appliance. I mean, we use toasters and hair dryers and all kinds of things, electric iron, vacuum cleaners. I mean, these things just don't kill people. It's not very unusual to be killed by a fan. So in 1973, the story changed. And Brother Patrick Hart, who was the secretary for Merton at his monastery, wrote a postscript to a book of Merton's journal when he traveled to Asia. And in the postscript to the journal of Merton's Journals of Asia, he wrote that Merton took a shower. And then after he took the shower, he tried to move a fan or adjust the fan, and he was wet, of course, see, from the shower. So the water, electricity, it makes more sense. And then the story became that he died of accidental electrocution after taking a shower. Well, people repeated it, and they repeated it in books. Some books say he was in a bathtub, and he touched the fan. That's where the fan fell into the bathtub. He slipped in the bathtub and grabbed the fan. Some people say he slipped getting out of the tub and grabbed the lamp. Say a radio fell into the tub. I mean, and the stories, there must be 50 different stories. It's incredible. When you go to look up Thomas Merton's death in these books, and they all repeat it in any different way they want. And some of them even have the date wrong. He died on December 10th. I had a Dominican monk, and their motto is Veritas, which is truth. A Dominican monk, Father Jacob Restrick, is a nice guy. But, he wrote in a book that Merton died on December 5th after he slipped in the tub and touched the lamp. So it's incredible.
I'd love to see some crime scene photos with the shower, and there's a lamp in there and a radio and a fan. Like in different.
Well, there are
photos. Oh, there are. Okay.
There are photos. Yeah, let me tell you about the photos. I'm glad you brought that up, because you would wonder, what about now go back to the original Thai documents I mentioned. None of those documents say anything about a shower or any of that. They do mention the fan. See, when he was found, he was on the floor with a fan lying across his body. So that's how we were told he was found. But I found letters from people that were actually there. They described the scene. These are the people that first arrived at the scene. And the first three people to find the body were three Benedictine monks, and they were the first ones to enter the room. And when they went into the room, one of them's name was Egbert Donovan. He turned to the other two monks and said, "Don't touch anything. He's already dead." I mean, you could see he's dead, so don't touch anything. And then the second monk turned to the third one, who was a Filipino named Celestine Say, and he said, "Go get your camera and take some pictures." He said, "We can show the police how we found him." So the Filipino goes to his room, which is just across the hall, and these rooms were divided by a screen, like a mesh screen, and just some bed sheets hung for curtains. So auditorially, he was in the same room as Merton. They could hear everything. He could hear Merton's footsteps. But that was just for privacy. They had the screen was for mosquitoes, and the sheets were hung for privacy. But essentially, they're in the same room. So he's very close by. But he goes and gets his camera, and he takes two pictures. And back in '68, before we had these cell phones, you had to have a flash bulb to shoot a picture indoors,
right,
for the light. But he didn't have a flash. He set his light meter, adjusted two different settings, took two pictures. And one of them came up pretty dark. It was underexposed. But the other picture came up very nice. And the idea of taking the pictures was to show the police what they found, because it didn't look right to them. In fact, Edgar Donovan wrote in a letter that he did not believe Merton could have touched that fan and landed with his hands in the position they were found. And I wasn't allowed to publish these pictures because they're owned by the monastery, but I can describe them to you. And that Merton was found lying flat on his back with his arms at his side and his palms down. Now, this is, if a person falls, and I showed these photos to my doctor, and actually two doctors, and they just shook their heads and said, nobody falls like that. Because if you fall down, you usually go down in a heap, your knees buckle and you go down, and you don't land flat on your back with your arms at your side. If anything, if you fell backwards, you probably throw your arms out to try to break the fall. But you don't land with your arms like you're at attention. So it'd be, that's very odd, the position of the body. And that's why these monks saw this. It doesn't look right. How did the fan get there?
Was he in a bathroom?
Well, he was not in a bathroom. He was in a cottage. He was in his room.
Okay.
And his room had a half bath. There was a half bath in his room, which had a toilet and a sink. And then he had to go outside of his door to get into the parlor area where there was another room with a shower. So, and he was also wearing pajamas. He had on a pair of short pajama bottoms, like you'd wear in the summer.
Right.
Not long pajamas like you wear in the winter, but this is Bangkok and it's hot. So he had a pair of Bermuda short type baggy shorts that were described as pajamas. And he was from, I mean, you don't take a shower in your pajamas, you don't bathe in your pajamas. I mean, the water thing that was invented in 1973 does not go with these photographs. So when the photographs, what happened to them when the police came is they could see this was not a real investigation because Merton had a bleeding wound on the back of his head. And the police said, oh, this is a heart attack. Let's just make it simple. We don't have stubborn problems here. And nobody believed it was a heart attack. The people that were at the conference and the people in the body, they thought this isn't good, you know. So they didn't give them the pictures. Besides, the Filipino had pictures of himself with the famous Thomas Merton. And he had pictures that he'd taken at the conference. He didn't want to give up his film. He just said, I'm not going to give him these pictures. So he took the pictures back to the Philippines, and when they were developed, he sent the one good photo that turned out to the Abbey in Kentucky and said, this is a photo I took of Merton when we found him. And this is before anything was touched. He writes this in the letter. He says, nothing was touched. It's exactly as we found him. And I took this photograph, and this is how he was. And I'd like to know, he said, what are the results of the autopsy? Because he just figured there had to be an autopsy. You know, I mean, you want to know what happened, don't you? Well, there was no autopsy. See, there was no autopsy in Thailand. When the body got back to Gethsemane, they didn't do an autopsy either. They just buried him right away. And then they get a letter, and somebody's asking about an autopsy, and they got a photograph where some bells went off, and they just said, well, we got to get these negatives. You know, we can't do this photo flying around. So they, I don't know if you remember, your listeners might remember John Howard Griffin. He was a writer who wrote a book called Black Like Me back in the 60s.
I do remember that, yeah.
Yes. Well, he was at the monastery at the Abbey of Gethsemane, and he was going to write a biography of Merton, and he had become a friend of Merton's. And John Howard Griffin told, and I got this is in correspondence, I have letters. He wrote to the abbot and Brother Patrick Hart, who invented the shower story. He said, look, we got to get these photos. Can't let this. We got to make sure nobody ever sees these ever. You know, this has got to get the negatives. And so they agreed. So he wrote to the Filipino and said, "Can you send me the negatives? We want to protect them because journalists would go nuts with this. So let us protect them, and we're so glad you took them." But the Filipino was a little skeptical. He didn't know who John Howard Griffin was. He said, "I don't want to send them to you." He said, "I'll send them to the abbot. I'm going to send them to the abbot because he'll know what to do." So he said, the negative strip has 3 photos on it, and I'm going to send it. So he mailed him the negative strip. And then the negatives disappeared. They're not down there now. I mean, they're not at the Abbey. They're not anywhere. So, but they're referred to in this letter. So, what happened to the negatives? Well, reading all these letters back and forth, and I wanted to get into John Howard Griffin's papers. They were in Austin, Texas, and also at Columbia University, but the Merton papers were at Columbia. So I zeroed in up there, and I got a PDF file of a lot of documents that they had. And in there, I saw what looked like a strip of negatives. And I didn't want to order them from Columbia because I thought if they knew what they had, they'd probably say, this is sensitive, you can't have it.
Right.
So I got in the car, I drove up to New York, and I brought my cell phone and my laptop computer so I could use it as a white table, a white background. And sure enough, in this box of documents, I found the envelope from the Philippines, registered mail, and inside was the strip of negatives. And I photographed them with my phone, and I reversed it using an app in my phone so I could see the picture. And I could actually bring up with, digital images, I would bring up the dark one. And after I had the photos, I asked the library if I could have a print. And they made me prints, really nice prints, a huge TIFF file, and they sent me the photographs of those negatives. And for the first time, the one that was too dark was now really visible. And then the library wrote to me and said, can you tell us what we're looking at? Because we want to, list it in our collection. What is this? This is a picture of this man on the floor with a fan on him. They didn't know what they had. So I told them what they had, and I said, you want to protect that because it's very, very rare. And because the letter from the Filipino, when he sent the negatives to the Abbey, he told them that they he was giving them to them as a gift. I checked with an attorney, and they technically own the rights to those images. And I had an artist, because I didn't want to publish pictures of Merton's dead body, but I had an artist who's a professional artist here in Washington that does drawings for the Supreme Court and so on. And she drew nice pencil drawings of these images. And then I sent those drawings to the Abbey and asked for permission to publish them. And my book was going to come out. And they said no. They said, we don't want you to publish those. So I can't publish them, but I do describe them in the book in detail of what's in the image. I think other interesting thing about the photos where Merton is lying, he's in the corner of the room, and in the corner there's two clothes racks, like you'd hang your clothes to dry. Mm. And his habit is sort of thrown on there in a haphazard way. It's kind of like, not neatly, it's just sort of like thrown there. And then he's on the floor with his head to the corner, but his left shoulder is underneath, mind you, the rod of this clothes rack that's closest to the floor. It's about the bottom rod is about 6 inches off the floor, but his shoulder is underneath of it. So, I mean, you have to think that he fell down and then scooted over a little bit to the left to get his shoulder underneath the clothes rack. I think the clothes rack may have gone over in a struggle when they hit him on the head, and then they set things back up and try to set things up quickly. And
gotcha.
Professional killers are good at killing, but they're not necessarily the best at staging a crime scene. And usually crime scenes, the police take charge and they take the photographs, and they control what gets out, what doesn't get out. Some things disappear if necessary. But in this case, you've got three monks who were very smart, saw something was wrong, and they photographed it. So we actually have crime scene photographs of the scene undisturbed as it was found. It's amazing, because they tell us that Merton was murdered, because people don't fall like that. You don't get the clothes rack over you like that. And this bleeding head wound is there. And the police report, the autopsy report, or not autopsy, but the coroner's report, and the death certificate, nobody mentions the bleeding head wound. Nobody mentions that it's even there.
Really?
But the witnesses mentioned it in their letters. There was a nun that was there who was a medical doctor. She was the fourth person to the scene. And she came in and looked at him and pronounced him dead. And she moved the fan to look at him. He had a burn on his pelvis because the fan was hot. It had current going through it, because there was a wire that had been installed, incorrectly. Somehow somebody installed a wire in the fan that made the whole thing hot. And because it was resting on his pelvis for I don't know how long, maybe an hour or two, it burned in that spot. But the bleeding head wound says we need an autopsy. What caused that? I mean, was it a blunt blow to the head? Was he jabbed in the head with an ice pick? Or what caused the wound on the head? Some people say, well, maybe he just fell on the floor and hit his head. Well, but you don't fall like that. If you look at these pictures, you'd say people don't fall like that.
Well, let me ask you this, because you described the picture. Go ahead. No, you described the picture that he's. Go ahead.
Well, the last thing I was going to say is if you want to roll someone over, you roll them over, you put their hands to their sides to roll them over. You can't roll someone over when their arms are out. And the bleeding head wound is not visible. When the first people come in, if they saw a bleeding head wound, they look, he's got a wound on his head. But see, because you turn them over, that's concealed. From the first impression is fan electrocution, maybe, but you don't see that bleeding head wound right away. Go ahead. You asked me something.
Yeah, because you were saying that he was lying down with his hands to his sides with his palms down, or palms up, was it?
Palms down.
Palms down, right. So obviously he was staged that way. And the wound was to the back of his head.
Back of his head, yes.
Okay, and I forgot what I was going to ask you. The people who showed up right away, did they think the death was caused by the wound to his head?
They didn't know. They were the doctor, the woman, the nun that was there. She was a medical doctor. She said she thought he might have been electrocuted because the fan was, electrified.
Right.
But she said, I can't figure out. She said, how did the fan get on top of him? How did he end up in this position? She said the position doesn't make sense. And that's what Egbert Donovan said. He said, I don't think his hands ever touched the fan and landed where they were. He says, it doesn't make sense. It didn't look right. And, you know, they didn't know what really killed him. Some people, like the nun, thought he might have been electrocuted. But see, it was really what was necessary was an autopsy to find out what caused the wound in the back of the head and what actually killed him.
Yeah, you'd think so.
There was another case I found in my research from an Indian Journal of Forensics where a victim had been a staged electrocution and the person had a wound on the back of their head, but they'd also been strangled. See, Merton could have also been strangled. See, we don't know without an autopsy. And when you have an unattended death, as Merton's was unattended, you can't. The first thing you have to do is consider it as a homicide until you can rule that out, and you can't rule it out without an autopsy. And they did not do an autopsy, and that's very suspicious. And then when they start making up stories about showers, that even makes it more suspicious. I mean, what is going on here? Because you're not even telling us. They didn't even report that the Thais concluded heart attack. They went with the accident from the very beginning. Like the story's already written before he dies.
Okay, then let me ask you this, because we only have about 10 minutes left. What did you conclude, after your investigation, what did you conclude was the cause of death, and also, too, who do you think killed him? Well, the cause of death is really kind of undetermined because we don't have an autopsy. Right.
But I'd say we do have a suspicious wound, and we have a suspicious scene, and we have a lot of lies that have been made up about his death that are not true. And things were, they invented stories to say that, and even Brother Patrick Hart at his own monastery said that the door to his room had to be broken down because it was locked from the inside. And that's not true. They reached inside. There was a little louver where you could reach in and unlock the door from the outside. You could lock it from the outside. The door was not broken down. But because the stories are made up, that this was broken down, it's very suspicious. Now, who did it is a good question, and I think the first primary suspect has to be the CIA, and the reason being there were CIA agents all over that area at the time. There was Operation Phoenix was there.
Right.
William Colby was in charge of that, and he was there. There were assassins all over the place. And here this guy shows up who's your problem, who's criticizing your news media. And then what you really points the finger to the CIA is how the news media handled his death, because they reported right out of the gate that this was an accidental death. But that's not what the Thai authorities concluded. So they were lying to us right out of the gate. The press was not telling us the truth, just like Merton said they don't. They don't tell you the truth. And they didn't tell us the truth about his death from the very beginning. So they have to, and they are your prime suspect, are your CIA news media. So I would say that they looked very guilty right out of the gate.
Now, what about the monks there? Did they see any suspicious people lurking around or visiting the day before, maybe, or?
Well, there was some suspicious stuff the day before, because the day before, when Merton and the Filipino returned to the cottage, the door was unlocked, and usually it wasn't locked. It was usually locked, and they thought, oh, that's funny, the door's unlocked. And then the Filipino said that Merton's room had been rearranged. Merton told him his room had been rearranged, so the furniture inside the room, the desk, the bed, the lamp, so things had been moved, and he thought he told the Filipino, maybe I think the maid rearranged my room. Well, the maid didn't rearrange the Filipino's room. Why did they rearrange Merton's room? Maybe it was getting it set in the way that they wanted it for the assassination.
That's interesting.
So there was something suspicious the day before. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, the book there's three parts of it. There's the first part is about the Thai, what happened in Thailand, and what the witnesses where they were there say they saw compared to the police report. And by the police report misspells everybody's name. All the names are misspelled of all the witnesses in the police report. And then when Brother Patrick Hart wrote this postscript where he invented the shower story, he did not mention anybody's name. He calls them the monk, the nun, they, them. The body was simply discovered. Like, we don't even know who discovered it. It was just the body was discovered. And, he doesn't mention any names. They're hiding the witnesses. And another curious thing that was really interesting is the pajamas I mentioned, there was a letter. There's two fake documents in this case, and one of them is a letter that was supposedly written by 6 Trappist monks. And this letter was originally circulated right after Merton's death, sent to friends of the Abbey. But it was later published in that book of the Asian journal of Thomas Merton, where they had all of his journals where Brother Patrick Hart invented the shower story. Well, in the book where they invented the shower story, the letter had 3 words removed, and those words were "in his pajamas."
Mm.
The original letter said he was found in his pajamas, but when it got published in the book in 1973, the editors took out the words "in his pajamas." And I contacted the publisher because once we determined that the letter was a fake letter, it was not authored by the people they say authored it, I was curious, how do you get permission to publish the letter? So I contacted New Directions Publishing in New York. I said, you removed 3 words from a letter, "in his pajamas." And in your book, you have acknowledgments of all the people who gave you permission for copyrighted material. Where did you get permission to publish that letter? And the guy wrote back to me and said, well, you're raising some very interesting questions, but unfortunately, we're not able to answer them because that was a long time ago.
Do you think the Thai police were in on this?
Oh, yeah. The Thai police and the CIA were very tight. I mean, we were running almost all of our bombing raids into Laos and North Vietnam. 80% of the bombing raids, at least, were coming out of Thailand, so they didn't have to fly all the way from Guam. And the CIA was smuggling drugs and stuff, and all this stuff was, the Thai police were corrupt. They were working with the U.S. The U.S. was giving Thailand millions, if not billions of dollars a year. They got more money than any other country in Southeast Asia at the time except South Vietnam. I mean, they had tons of money from the U.S. The U.S. had bases in Thailand. They had CIA bases that were training assassins in Thailand, and they were working hand in glove with the Thais. And if the U.S. said, we need you to write a police report on something for us, say it's an accident or a natural cause or something, they're just going to do it.
Yeah, our guest, you Turley, mentions the Phoenix program. The listeners should go and check out our interview with Doug Valentine, who did a exhaustive research and a book into the Phoenix program. We actually, Casey gave him all access to all information. They visited him at his house. He has tape recordings with Casey, hours and hours. So that's
wow.
The Doug Valentine interview. Now, what about since the book's come out, have any whistleblowers tipped you off and tried to contact you? I know the book just came out in March, but still, anything?
Well, there is something that I'm going to have to hold it close to my vest. But there is a person who has more information, and they're doing a book.
Oh,
okay. There's another book coming, and it's going to be very interesting because this person was surprised by my book and what I found, and it set off a light bulb. This person said, "Oh my goodness!"
Oh, really?
They have. There's more coming. Believe me, there's a lot more coming.
Okay, great. Hey, you know what you do?
I'm not supposed to tell about it because it's not out yet. So, but something's coming. I'll leave it at that.
As soon as it does, give us a call and we'll put him on the air too. And we'll have you both back on.
I will. He's a very nice man.
Okay, so we're just about out of time. What do you want to leave us with, and how can people contact you? How can they get a hold of you?
Well, the 2 websites are the best. The martyrdomofThomasMerton.com, and there's a form there where you can click a button and find me, and then the same as at the other FBICoverup.com, and you can click a button there and find me. So, but thanks for having me as a guest. I encourage people to always listen to your program because I think you have things that are sometimes not reported, and it's hard to find information. So it's always nice to have programs like yours for people to get information that's hard to get.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. You, Turley. And if you need a magician, how can people get a hold of you if they need a magician? They got to pull a rabbit out of a hat.
There is another website called TurleyMagic.com.
And do you have a rabbit you can pull out of a hat? Do you have a rabbit?
I do have a rabbit. His name is Stu, but you can't eat him. It's Rabbit Stew.
Okay, that's a good one, man.
He doesn't like that name, but it's a good joke.
It is a good joke. Okay, I'm gonna have to remember that. You, Turley, okay. The Martyrdom of Thomas Merton. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night. Okay, all right. Hey, boy, that was a nice. I enjoyed that. Very good content there from you, Turley. The Martyrdom of Thomas Merton, an investigation. Check out the website. He's got these documents up there and stuff that you can check out. It's interesting, too. When I first popped on that website, the first thing I saw was the report of the death of an American citizen from the American Foreign Service, which, you know, today it's called the U.S. Foreign Service. But in those days, in 1968, we didn't care about North America, South America. We were just America. United States didn't give a damn about anybody else on the continent. We owned the continent, and we let everybody know it every chance we had. Okay, listen, if you enjoyed today's show, by the way, too, we got a hold of Mr. Turley, through Patrick Knowlton, and that's the same website, FBIcover-up.com, about the Vince Foster case. He writes about the Vince Foster case, a lot of investigation into that, so I want to thank him for that. If you enjoyed today's show, like I said, we did a whole investigation there with Doug Valentine. We did 2 hours with him. And he wrote the book on the Phoenix program. Okay? And that's interview with him is exclusively in our members section at oppermanreport.com. It's a 2-hour interview. After I finished that interview with him, he contacted me every day after that, telling me this was the greatest interview he's ever done, more concise and more elaborate than anybody's ever done with him. Thanking me up and down. He came back on the show after that. We talked about some stuff. So check that out, okay? Check out the Opperman Report members section at oppermanreport.com. There's so much content, exclusive content in there that you can't find anywhere else. Just like this information you're getting from Patrick Knowlton about Kavanaugh. And we have that recording, the recorded telephone conversation with Kavanaugh where he's giggling about covering up the Vince Foster investigation. And then he says, are you recording me? You know, of course I am. So, you know, we're working so hard for you here. And we really do appreciate when listeners support the show. And the way you can do that is by becoming a member. And I'll give you a deal, a membership, because here we are. It's past the end of the month, but I'm still trying to cover last month's expenses. So I'll give you a deal if you contact me directly at oppermanreport@gmail.com. I'll give you 13 months for $65. Just email me, oppermanreport@gmail.com, and say, hey, Ed, I want that deal, you know, and I'll hook you up with a deal. And then the money gets into our account right away. We can cover the expenses for last month, which aren't covered yet. Okay. And as a matter of fact, I had to use my credit card to pay this month's rent, my own personal rent. And I made sure that all the bills were covered to keep the show on air before I keep a roof over my head. Because that's how seriously I take this. And I'm starting to second guess myself here. Am I making a wise life decision here to continue doing this show and remaining struggling the way I'm putting out 7 hours of content a week with very little support? So if you want to keep this show on the air, if you're one of those people that just obsessively listen to the show and have to email me 10 times a day, and consider sending a donation. You go to oppermanreport.com. There's a donate button there as well. And if you want to advertise on our show, let me tell you, man, we have just been advertising for a short time, CardKing.com. I hear, everyone, CardKing.com. I hear it all day long. So I know people have it memorized. They know who the sponsors are. They know their names, and the people are going to be memorizing phone numbers shortly. You can contact me directly at oppermanreport@gmail.com. Thank you so much. emailrevealer.com. People ask me all the time, hey, Ed, are you still a private investigator? I sure am. Go to emailrevealer.com. We handle adoption investigations, infidelity investigations, where you give us your spouse's email address. We trace it back to online dating websites, catch them cheating online, email tracing, locate or identify somebody from as little as an anonymous email address. Someone owe you money? Back child support? We can find that deadbeat, locate his hidden assets, locate his hidden bank accounts, find his current place of employment, and even assist you in obtaining a judgment and recover that judgment for you. emailrevealer.com. Digital forensics, computer forensics, cell phone forensics, recover deleted text messages, create a report that you can use in court. Emailrevealer.com, 800-572-9762.